I am getting incredibly worried about the initiatives. For several reasons, but now we're really starting to see the extent of the money that has been raised to defeat the initiatives and the extent to which the corporate media is aligned with those forces to convince people to vote no. This segment is brought to you by Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. I'm down 37 pounds on the program, and I lost most of that in just 2 months. Do what I did and what so many other undivided viewers have done. Schedule your free 15-minute consultation today at eastsideweight-loss-clinic.com. So the Seattle Times out with another hit piece on Brian Haywood. You'd think he's just the most dangerous man in Washington. It's called Inside One Man's Campaign to Take Down Washington's Infant Carbon Market. So, of course, it's about Brian Haywood. He is the backer of the Let's Go Washington initiatives. This one focuses on the initiative 2117 to repeal the Climate Commitment Act. Remember, vote yes to pay less. Vote yes on all of the initiatives if you want to repeal some of these crazy policies, wasted money, new taxes, etc. So the whole story is ridiculous. And you could tell they have these little areas where they're trying to sound fair, but they spend much more time sort of vilifying Brian Haywood and what he's doing rather than looking at these much more powerful interests that are spending more money, doing even shadier things to try to defeat all of these initiatives, including 2117. So the kind of through line of this story, the Seattle Times focuses on these gas rollbacks. In fact, I participated in, Nicole and I did one of these gas rollback events where Let's Go Washington, it's kind of genius. They're trying to raise awareness for the fact that the Climate Commitment Act has raised gas prices. At one point, as much as 50 cents a gallon. Last summer, we had the highest gas prices in the country. It's the first time that ever happened. And it's because of the carbon auctions, because you have these quote unquote polluters who are being taxed. They pass that cost along to consumers at the gas pump. So what they do is Let's Go Washington chooses a gas station for a 2-hour period of time, and they roll back gas prices to the national average. So when we were in Auburn, was that a couple days ago or Friday? They rolled it back to $2.99 a gallon. And so the Seattle Times is focusing on that as being like a shady, trying to bribe sort of voters into, oh, we'll give you free gas, but, you know, or we'll give you cheaper gas, but you got to vote for these things. It says the practice seems fishy to James Long, a political scientist with the University of Washington. He questioned the legality of paying for someone's gas at a political event. Haywood's opponents filed an ethics complaint in August with the State Public Disclosure Commission, accusing him of illegally trying to sway voters. In turn, Haywood filed a complaint with the commission accusing state officials of illegally timing their $200 rebate check for lower income ratepayers funded through the Climate Commitment Act to reach voters before the November election as a way of garnering support for the policy. And so they mention it there. And I think this is, you know, somebody could argue like, hey, you're trying to convince people when they come to get cheaper gas that, hey, gas would just be cheaper if you repeal the Climate Commitment Act. But this is a private person, you know, private Let's Go Washington using their own money to roll back gas prices versus the government using your money to bribe you to vote a certain way and then lying about it, even though we have the smoking gun. And this is what bothers me about the Seattle Times and their reporting is like, oh, well, we mentioned it. And they say, what do they say here about, he's accused state officials of illegally timing the $200 rebate to coincide with the November election. No, he didn't accuse them. They did that. And the Seattle Times won't just say they did that. And the Seattle Times just skims over that part of it. So much focus on these gas rollback events from Brian Haywood and virtually no focus or accountability for the fact that the government literally rolled out a bribe. And in a Department of Commerce email, they say explicitly that the funds have to be deposited into eligible customers' accounts on or before September 15th, before the state votes on the initiative. So don't you think the Seattle Times would do some giant expose on that? Instead, they do an expose on Brian Haywood and these gas rollback events and just mention fleetingly, well, he also accuses them of bribing people with these rebates. No, they did bribe people with the rebates. Like, this email came out a week ago. Before this story, the Seattle Times has this email, and they just gloss over it, right? So this sort of theme continues of honing in on Brian Haywood, evil, rich man, trying to ruin everything, and then glossing over these much more powerful interests doing incredibly shady things. So, for instance, it says, with his money, Haywood has afforded himself an outsized influence on Washington's climate policy. His efforts could easily ripple into other states watching the election while deciding whether to enact similar policies of their own. In that way, and this is the kicker, in that way, this ballot initiative has the potential to shape the national emissions profile and, in essence, the climate itself. They literally wrote this. This ballot initiative has the potential to shape the national emissions profile and, in essence, the climate itself. The Seattle Times is literally saying, with no evidence whatsoever, that if Washington State's carbon auctions are repealed in November, it has the potential to shape the climate, the global climate itself. Not only do they have no evidence to back that up, there's actually ample evidence to show that that claim cannot be proven. For instance, in the Seattle Times editorial board's own interview, when they were deciding, do we endorse 2117 or not, they ended up saying, don't vote for it. The Ed Board asked one of the backers of the CCA whether they had any way of proving that the CCA was helping the climate. Here it is.
How are you tracking it? You preserve some forest land that captures carbon. People replace their gas furnaces with heat pumps. How are you keeping track of those kind of things?
Yeah, we don't have like a system yet that sort of tallies up all of the CO2 reductions from every investment that we make. Some of the investments are, we've invested in stronger air quality monitoring networks throughout the state. There's not going to be a direct greenhouse gas benefit from having more accurate information about what air quality is in South Tacoma, but it is something that our, elected members of the legislature think is important.
They literally told the Seattle Times, the people who support the CCA, no, we don't have a way to track it. And some of the stuff we're paying for with CCA money, technically it's not designed to reduce carbon emissions. Like air quality warnings. Like it'll tell you if air quality is bad, but it doesn't do anything to fix it. Yet the Seattle Times actually writes in this article, a month away from an election, that if voters vote yes to repeal the CCA, it could shape the national emissions profile and, in essence, the climate itself. Not to mention, the Discovery Institute just did this report. Jonathan Lesser with Discovery Institute was on. They actually looked at not just the CCA. If Washington State were able to reach all of its climate goals, all of its emission goals, every crazy wild goal it's set.
Let's assume that, an even better case, they can hit zero energy-related greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, not 2050, sooner, by 2040. How would that change world temperatures by the year 2100, when all the CO2 reductions kind of work their magic? And it turns out the answer is 3/1000ths of 1 degree.
It's just insane. So I want to revisit one part of the Seattle Times article. Can you back up that last quote from the Times? It says, with his money, Haywood has afforded himself an outsized influence on Washington's climate policy. With his money, Haywood has afforded himself an outsized influence. Like, he spent probably $8 million of his own money on these initiatives. And not just the CCA. That's for all 7 of the initiatives that were run. He spent about $8 million of his own money. And they bury the fact that in this long article, like painting him as this rich guy who has this outsized influence on politics, they bury the fact that the no on 2117 side has raised far more money, millions and millions and millions of dollars more to defeat the initiative. And the people who are donating to the no on 2117 cause are way richer, way more powerful, have way more of an outsized influence on Washington politics than Brian Haywood. It buries it. It says, certainly the campaign against 2117 has raised much more than Haywood, and in the weeks before the election appears set to ramp up spending. The 5 most lucrative groups campaigning against him have raised a combined $22.3 million, of which they've spent about a quarter, $22.3 million to defeat the initiatives. Some of the largest donations for the cause have come from Steve and Connie Ballmer of the Ballmer Group, Bill Gates, Microsoft, Amazon, BP venture capitalist Nick Hanauer, and REI. And then, of course, the Seattle Times has to note, editor's note, the Ballmer Group and the Gates Foundation support some coverage in the Seattle Times, but do not have any knowledge of or influence over the work. Say what coverage they support. Say what coverage they support, Seattle Times. Does anybody know what coverage they support? The Seattle Times Climate Lab, where they talk about climate change and where they vilify people like Brian Haywood for trying to get rid of the CCA. So you got this whole article where they're vilifying this one guy who spent, a few $1 million on all of the initiatives, which, by the way, he couldn't buy his way onto the ballot. He had to get 1.3 million Washingtonians to sign on to them. Screw the voters. It's all about Brian Haywood and how evil he is. And you're painting it as this guy who has he's purchased this outsized influence in politics, while you acknowledge at the very bottom of your article that the people fighting against him are way more powerful, have way more money, have donated way more to defeat the initiative to repeal the CCA. Oh, and they happen to, just a little editor's note at the bottom, like, hey, no big deal. Just letting you know, Ballmer's Group, Gates Foundation, some of the richest people in the world, they also happen to fund some of the Seattle Times reporting. We're not going to mention that it's our climate reporting. It's our climate reporting. Look, it's the job of the media to hold powerful people accountable. I do believe Brian Haywood has put himself in a position where he is a powerful person, where he is a consequential figure in Washington politics, an influential figure in Washington politics, and because of that, he has to be held accountable if there are things to hold him accountable for. I am totally fine with Seattle Times talking about these gas rollback events, questioning whether it's an effort to bribe voters. But in doing that and writing all this about it and then glossing over the freaking smoking gun we have, that the government, the governor, the most powerful person in Washington politics, lied repeatedly, bribed people with their own money. It's there in black and white. And you gloss over it as if it's some secondary thought. Like, oh, just by the way, like, yeah, powerful Brian Haywood, but the governor, he might have lied about it. They might have bribed people. Like, there might be this email from the Department of Commerce where they were saying, got to get this out to voters before they vote. We have everything and everybody working against us. And that's such a hard environment to win in. It's not just the Ballmers, the Gates, Nick Hanauer, Amazon, REI, and all of the millions of dollars that they're bringing to bear. It is the legacy media across the board that is actively influencing the minds of their readers and of their viewers. How do you compete against that? And by the way, they do it with lies and deceit. Lies and deceit and omission. And here we are, and the people who support the initiative and Brian Haywood and Let's Go Washington trying to do what we can to raise awareness based on truth and reason and actual statistics about what the CCA actually does or doesn't do for the environment. Man, I'm becoming increasingly concerned about the initiatives because frankly, the yes on the initiative side does not have the money to be able to compete against the number of lies being spewed by the other side. And they don't have the attention of media outlets or the obedience of media outlets to push out their message. Absolutely wild stuff.